Picture a war that lasts less than a week, yet redraws the Middle East for generations. That was the Six-Day War. In the next few minutes, you'll understand three key pieces. First, how the region slid to the edge. Second, why the opening strike decided almost everything. And third, what the war changed right up to today. Piece 1. The edge of the cliff. By the mid-1960s, Israel and its neighbors were living in a permanent state of tension. Since 1948, there had been border raids, artillery duels, and political speeches that sounded more like countdowns than diplomacy. In the north, Israel and Syria clashed repeatedly over borders and control of water sources. In Cairo, President Gamal Abdel Nasser wanted Egypt to lead the Arab world, and he couldn't afford to look weak. In Amman, King Hussein of Jordan faced intense pressure not to stand aside if a regional war erupted. Then, in May 1967, everything sped up. Egypt moved large forces into the Sinai Peninsula and demanded that United Nations peacekeepers leave the area. Soon after, Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping. For Israel, that wasn't just a provocation. It was a direct threat to a vital lifeline, and historically it had been treated as a reason for war. At the same time, Arab states began coordinating more openly. Egypt signed defense agreements with Jordan and Iraq. Radio broadcasts and newspapers across the region talked about a coming battle to crush Israel. To Israeli leaders, it felt like a tightening noose. If they waited for the first blow, they feared they might not survive long enough to respond. And here's the point of no return. Israel chose not to wait. Piece 2. The strike that decided the war. At dawn on June 5, 1967, Israel launched a massive surprise air attack. Israeli jets flew low to avoid radar, hit Egyptian airfields, and destroyed much of Egypt's air force on the ground within hours. It was a gamble. If the attack failed, Israel would be exposed to bombardment from every direction. But it worked. And once Israel controlled the skies, the war's tempo changed completely. On the southern front, Israeli forces surged into Sinai. Egyptian units, now without air cover and hit by confusion in command, began pulling back towards the Suez Canal. The retreat turned chaotic, and Israel advanced fast across the desert. On the eastern front, Jordan entered the fight after mixed signals and heavy shelling around Jerusalem. Israel responded by pushing into the West Bank. Fighting was fierce in and around Jerusalem, but within days, Israel captured East Jerusalem and the surrounding territory. In the north, Israel and Syria fought along the Golan Heights. After several days of artillery exchanges and mounting pressure, Israel launched a ground assault up the steep terrain. Syrian defenses broke and Israel took control of the heights. 3 fronts, 1 week, a speed that felt unreal even to the people living it. By June 10th, a ceasefire was in place. In 6 days, the battlefield had transformed into a new political map. Here's the mid-war map moment, because you can't understand the rest without it. Israel now held the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. These weren't empty spaces. They included strategic high ground, key waterways, sacred cities, and millions of civilians suddenly living under a new military reality. Piece 3. The shockwave. For the Arab world, the defeat was devastating, politically, psychologically, and symbolically. For Israel, it was a stunning military victory, but it opened a dilemma that still defines the conflict. What happens when security is gained through occupation, and how long can that situation last? The war also deepened the Palestinian crisis. Many Palestinians were displaced again, and those who remained in the newly occupied territories faced a future filled with uncertainty. The conflict shifted from a war between states to a much more tangled struggle involving land, identity, and daily life. International diplomacy rushed to catch up. Later in 1967, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 242, calling for peace based on withdrawal from territories in exchange for recognition and secure borders. But the language was vague enough that each side read it differently. The result was not closure, but a framework that would be argued over for decades. The Six-Day War didn't end the story. In many ways, it restarted it, setting the stage for the War of Attrition, the Yom Kippur War, the rise of new militant movements, and a cycle of negotiations and breakdowns that continues. And that brings us to today. So much of the modern debate, borders, settlements, security doctrines, the status of Jerusalem, and the lived reality in Gaza and the West Bank runs back to those 6 days in 1967. The war was short, but its consequences are long.